Thoughts from the basement. It's been a while. I really need to get back on track with this, sharing my thoughts with you guys and putting them out there in relatively short little snippets. So, here are some thoughts from this week. I listened to President Biden's full length speech to Congress, and I listened to part of Rick Santorum's talk on or analysis on CNN. Now, I understand that they're both from different parties, but I do see a similarity between both gentlemen. And I would like to address that and my concern about that in this Thoughts from the Basement. First of all, Mr. Santorum may be making a mistake. Maybe he knew better and just got caught in the middle, if we want to give him the benefit of the doubt. But he made the statement that we, Europeans, built this country from the ground up and that there was no one here before. He quickly amended it to say that were Native Americans here, but that there is not much Native American culture in the dominant or in American culture. There's a problem there with historical accuracy, obviously. We had, or there were, I should say there were over 500 distinct nations from north of Mexico in what is now Canada and the United States. Those were living here for perhaps thousands of years before Columbus and the major wave of European immigrants arrived, and so we should not ignore them. Secondly, as far as what they were capable of and what they did, we need to acknowledge that as well. Even if we look at it from a Western technological perspective, there were quite some accomplishments, namely the city of Cahokia, which is just outside what is now St. Louis. At one point in Cahokia's history, it had a larger population than Paris at the same time. You can look this up, just look up Google Cahokia and you'll find it. I also suggest the book Indian Givers, as well as How Native Americans Enriched the World, as good source material to find out just how much Native Americans, both in North and South America, impacted European culture in Europe and here in the United States. While it's true that we do not look at dominant white American culture today and obviously see Native influence, that does not mean it is not there and is not part of what we experience and how we think. And those two books, as well as I'm sure numerous other sources, help us to see that. Just a couple small things that I know of to help show you what I mean. Foods that we eat here in the United States and that have affected our culture in culinary ways. Tortillas, tomatoes, potatoes from South America, vanilla, chocolate, numerous types of corn, all bred, until recently, by Native Americans. The paths that a lot of the Native Americans used on the East Coast for hunting and travel, many of those are the same as the roads that are now used. So there has been impact, there has been influence, and that's not even bringing up our own concepts of what it means to be free and what the stereotype of Native Americans is as tied in with our Westerns. So there's an issue for us to correct in our knowledge, and I urge you to look into this further. Talk to people who know, talk to Native Americans who know, look up sources on the internet, look all over the place, and you'll find what's out there. Secondly, if we continue to say there was nothing here before Europeans arrived, we fall into not just a historical error, but a human error. That is, an error of who is regarded as human. If we say that there was no one or nothing here before Europeans arrived in great waves, we are essentially saying that those here before us Europeans were not human, that they were nothing. Now, while we may not necessarily mean it, Like, well, okay, well, I guess, well, there wasn't nothing, but there was. I guess I'll give him a little bit of room. That is not right. That is wrong. And we need to change our attitude as well as our knowledge of history if we believe that we built this country, the United States, from nothing up. At the very least, we need to acknowledge that some of those early European explorers and colonists would not have survived to build a country several hundred or so years later if it had not been for Native Americans. We need to recognize that the Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, had a working democratic system several hundred years before our US democracy, and that some of the ideas that are in our democracy were taken from the Haudenosaunee. That is something that Ben Franklin commented particularly. You can look that up if you wish. Secondly, how does this tie in with what President Biden said? Well, I'll let Mark Charles talk about the Transcontinental Railroad and the issues that that causes with regard to industry and those types of things. You can look up Mark Charles here on Facebook, look up Second Cup of Coffee, Mark Charles, and you'll find his reaction, his response to President Biden's comments on that. However, one of the things that I noticed listening to President Biden's speech was that he wants, and presumably we want, the United States to be a leader in the world, to be the best country in the world. And we seem to have the thought, at least he does, that if we lead, other countries will follow us. They will become like us, following our example, and then the world will be a better place. With the exception of a couple countries who we know are our enemies, and that's because they are ruled by autocrats. The issue I have with that is this. Why do we have the gall and the pride to think that our solution to issues are the solutions for every country in the world? Why do we believe that we have to be leaders? Why do we believe that we are in competition, Biden's word, not mine, that we are in competition with other countries? Why can't we be our best, whatever that is, and not worry about being the best? We need to determine, what does it mean to be citizens of the United States currently? What should it mean to be citizens of the United States? And how do we best do that? Following which, or not following which, but part of that is determining what is our role with our neighbors around the world. Not how do we lead them, but how do we serve them? How do we work with our international neighbors to make the world a better place to live? If we lead in some areas, great. If we follow in some areas, great. Other nations have things to teach us. Other nations have things that we can learn from. To say that we are in competition to be the best, to say that we should lead in order to be the best, and so everyone else will follow what we are doing, is hubris. It's arrogance, and it's some form of ethnocentrism if we want to take the United States as an ethnic group. There's my problem with Biden's speech. It's not what we're going to do with the money or who's going to be trampled on in our own country, or socialist or Republican or communist or capitalist. That's not the first thing that I have a problem with in Biden's speech. The problem I have is the lack of humility of the United States, both in recognizing its history, according to Santorum, who is a Republican, and the supremacy of this country currently in the mind of Biden and many other US citizens. We need to step down from our high horse. We need to recognize our deficiencies and our faults, be willing to learn from others, renounce the competition, and learn to grow together. That might be as close to a rant as you'll hear on Thoughts from the Basement. This one's longer than usual. If you stayed through to the end, thank you for listening. I hope this has given you some food for thought. Pray about it, consider it, compare it with scriptural teaching, those of us who are Christians at any rate, to see if I'm right, to see if the attitudes that I'm talking about are ones that are congruent with Scripture. Thank you very much. Shalom.